It's very unusual, but of course, there's nothing normal about this administration. There is obviously an election component to this, a sense of looking tough on the foreign policy stage, standing up to China, a message that plays well back home. But look, let's also be fair. This trip does have a strategic rationale for America, and that is consolidating this network or a sort of a loose coalition of countries who are concerned and anxious about China's rise. And of course, nowhere is more important to America in that sense than India.
Indeed. And India is the one country that seems to be sort of really having China enclosing it. They have shored up support with Pakistan, Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, the Chinese coming out to the US and saying, do not bully Sri Lanka. These are difficult issues for countries like Sri Lanka because they've taken billions from China.
It's a profoundly difficult issue. You know, when you talk to Indian officials about this, they say you have to remember Sri Lanka is an aircraft carrier parked off our southern coast. It's very close. Historically, Indian troops have had, their Vietnam in Sri Lanka in the 1980s. They appreciate they can't bully these small countries into doing what they want. But of course, China's growing influence, its ability to offer cheap arms, submarines to Bangladesh, other types of weapons to Sri Lanka, its ability to use debt as an instrument to expand its control over key facilities. All of this profoundly worries the Indians, who are scrambling to make up for the influence in places like Sri Lanka. Of course, Sri Lanka is a kind of canary in the coal mine, but you see this in Nepal, you see this in Bangladesh, you see this in Bhutan. From India's perspective, all around their land periphery, on their maritime borders, you see this growing Chinese influence in military terms, diplomatic terms, economic terms. So I think for them, it's vital to be able to link up not just to America, but also to Australia, to Japan and other countries and push back at that influence in a coherent and robust way.
How significant do you think it was allowing Australia to rejoin the Malabar exercises, or do you think it was particularly about shoring up this alliance in the region?
Incredibly important. As many of your viewers will know, there is an institution known as the Quad, an informal diplomatic bloc comprising America, India, Japan and Australia. And, it's not an alliance, it isn't a security bloc, but it's a loose coalition that is aligning on lots of these issues that are important when it comes to the rise of China. Things like investment standards, cybersecurity, maritime security, freedom of navigation. India was always a little bit nervous about doing anything to tweak China's nose. But of course, what you've had this year is a very serious standoff on the disputed Himalayan border between India and China. And that seems to have convinced India to allow Australia back into these exercises that were previously only America and India, and then America, India, and Japan. And now, for the first time in, I think, 16 or 17 years, we'll have all four of these Quad countries at sea together. And I think symbolically, it's a very, very key moment.
None of this is making China happy. The US has just inked new arms sales to Taiwan. There is so much that China is pushing back on. How might we see that being manifested in the region?
I think it entirely depends on what happens in the White House, or at least that it partly depends on that. You have a lot of countries who are concerned about China's rise, but are worried about a new Cold War between America and China, in which they feel, rightly or wrongly, that they are forced to choose sides. They would rather not choose. They would rather have American military protection at the same time as having no constraint on their ability to receive Chinese investment and trade with Beijing. And of course, that dilemma is becoming ever harder to sustain. And so you have other countries, and I would count Australia among these, but also India, that are realizing that balancing act is so difficult, and they are progressively deepening and strengthening their ties with America and building their defenses against China. And that progress is going to occur whoever wins the White House, whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump. But I think if it's Joe Biden, what we're going to see is a more balanced Asia policy in which military instruments, things like warships sailing through the South China Sea, bomber flights through Asia, are balanced with perhaps a more effective and a more nuanced trade and economic policy that allows for a more kind of complete and nuanced way of pushing back against Chinese influence.
It's going to be fascinating to see what happens a week from now, although it could take a lot longer. Shashank, always great to have you on. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.